Hello. Hey, Matt. Can you hear me all right?
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. I'm excited to do this. I think for everybody tuning in and listening here, this is a big honor for me. I've known Matt for probably about 12
Forever.
years now. I think I met you in early 2008, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
Um, and for those that don't know, I'm sure most people know, Matt is the co-founder of WordPress and somebody I consider a friend, a leader in this space. In addition to the co-founder of WordPress, Matt also is the CEO of Automattic and has numerous products underneath that umbrella of WordPress.com, Jetpack, WooCommerce, many products I'm sure we've all probably used over at some period of time. And something that's unique about Matt that most people don't know, we know you've changed a lot of how we view open source, but you've also changed a lot of how we view working. And especially in today's world where we're all starting to catch up to what you've been doing a long time, where working remote, and Automatic's been definitely a pioneer in that as well. So anyway, not many introductions can do you justice, but
Oh,
good to
thank you
see
very
you again,
much.
buddy.
No, it's good to see you as well.
So I guess to start things, how you been? Where are you in the world? You're normally either in San Francisco or in
Hmm.
Texas, somewhere. How have things been during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I was able to spend the first part of the year in Houston, which is
Okay,
great, and then the second part I've been in San Francisco. Everyone else, all the other techies were leaving San Francisco, so I figured I'd swim upstream,
why
jump on
not
a
join?
ferry, and and go to San Francisco instead of leaving it.
Nice.
And I really appreciated being there. There's lots of great nature around, and
Yeah,
even though it's been a number of lockdowns and things. Been able to get out camping and just seeing a bit of nature. And of course, we just released a great version of WordPress, so that always
that's true.
makes for a good week.
That's true. That's very cool. How was the teams in general? Have you had much of an issue? I'm sure you've probably
Yeah.
been able to adapt pretty well, but just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, we were already working from home before,
Yeah.
so we had that kind of muscle built up.
Hmm.
But working from home in a lockdown or a pandemic is totally different, right? So
Uh-huh.
people like I was worse used to working from home alone, not
Yeah.
having other people around. And
Yeah.
people have kids at home, maybe elders that need extra care. Of course, if anyone gets sick, they need extra help. And so I would say that for most year, we were probably running at 75% capacity,
Okay.
because just a lot of people were affected. Automatic has folks in 77 countries,
Wow.
actually over 40 or 50 in India. So we hire in almost every country of the world. And so at various points during the year, different countries are being impacted differently, and of course,
Mhm.
different cities and places. So the good news is, though, I've really seen a ton of my colleagues step up. So those who were lucky enough not to be impacted have really, tried to fill in the slack for the folks who were, and it's
Nice.
been a really, really heartening to see.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the people who's been trying to fill in for others, so I've been working a little
Yeah.
extra hard, but I'm lucky to be able to.
That's great. I mean, it's interesting. I find it interesting because it's something that all of humanity has in common right now. And it's not,
Yeah.
there's very few times in life that you actually have that there's all these borders and all these different things that separate many people, but it's something that regardless of where you are, um, everybody's concerned about it. So anyway, I just wanted to start with that. And I think it's important because a lot of people don't understand how WordPress started. And, when they like most, I don't want to call it a startup, but things that become large, they just assume it was always large. So if you don't mind, like maybe just shed a little moment on, because I want to lead into really your passion behind open source and why did this, how did WordPress begin, and
Mhm.
why did you decide to get this thing going?
Yeah, those are both interesting areas. One, this, as you mentioned, the myth of separation,
Uh
right? We
huh.
have this idea that we're separated, but we're all connected.
Yeah.
Um, how WordPress got started is actually related to that. Is actually connected. WordPress, I had started blogging and using software that was popular at the time, like Movable Type, Blogger, LiveJournal, but I wanted one where I could have more control. So I
Hmm.
ended up with a PHP-based open source one called B2 Cafe Log, and it was just a really cool, slick one at the time. I started volunteering on the forums there, first asking questions, then answering questions. Then I started to, dig into the code and submit little patches to the code. And some of these were accepted, and I had the thrill of my code being running on dozens of websites, which was really cool.
Yeah.
But then the B2 Cafe Log basically had one major developer. There wasn't really a team behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And when that developer essentially took a break, he kind of dropped off the internet, the community was left not really knowing what was going to happen next. So there were actually, as you know, with open source, there's the ability for people to fork the software. So they can essentially copy and paste what's there today, change the name, and continue its development. And people might do this if they disagree with the direction something's going,
Mm-hmm.
or just as commonly, they might do this if for some reason a project is abandoned. So there are actually about 5 or 6 forks of B2,
Okay.
and WordPress was just one of them. I teamed up with a guy named Mike Little in the UK, and who shared kind of a similar philosophy. And we tried to make one that was just, our focus was really just being a bit easier to use.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of my friends in Houston, my background was kind of music and the arts, and so I wanted
Yeah.
my friends to be able to use it. And Mike just had an incredible knack for what resonated with people. Because it was also helped that we were both using this software ourselves and bloggers ourselves. So making the software for ourselves, it also helped make it for other people.
Totally.
That ended up going well. So I had actually reached out to a few of the other forks and
Mm-hmm.
said, hey, why don't we work together instead of, each having these separate forks? And so a lot of them joined up with WordPress. And then when the original developer B2 came back, he actually said, oh, this project looks really good. I don't want to work on this anymore, but now WordPress is the official continuation of B2. So there'll be no more new versions of B2. Switch over to WordPress if you want to continue. And that was kind of our first kind of boost.
It's
But in
awesome.
the beginning, it was Mike and myself doing all the support, writing all the documentation, writing all the code,
So
doing all the
are you just
design.
doing
I made the logo,
you made the original logo? I didn't know that.
the old one before the
Oh,
good one that we have
yeah,
now.
yeah. Okay, cool. Very cool. So the part I've always been like, I knew you played saxophone, and hence why all the releases are, musically oriented, or from a, you probably say it better than I am, but from a famous musician.
hmm
Um, were you also a developer? Like, did you go to school for
A
that?
developer. Um, Not entirely, but so my father was a computer engineer.
Uh-huh.
So he worked mostly for kind of oil companies.
Okay.
And it was a different era. He wore a tie and
Yeah,
carried a
for
briefcase to
sure.
work every day, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of a different realm of technology. So computers were always around the house, and I learned a lot from being around them. And he definitely pointed me in directions that were
Uh-huh.
helpful. So he like bought me my first regular expressions book, and
Wow.
regular expressions ended up being one of my first forays into programming.
Yeah.
But really, I was probably more interested in gaming. I was really into the internet. I loved like news groups and websites, and I really enjoyed building computers. So
Okay.
that was kind of my business, my kind of freelance business at the time was I would either build you a computer or a website, and both were about $500. And I'd buy the parts and probably for 450 and then build you the computer, or
Uh-huh.
I'd use Dreamweaver and Front Page and a bunch of terrible stuff to make you a website. The
Yeah.
people who got the computers probably had a better deal, but I ended up making a number of websites for musicians around town, and that's how I got my own start with developing for the web and
Cool.
working for others.
Well, I do know that there's a lot of web pros that are tuning into this. So I think all of us at some point in our past, if you've been in the tech space, you considered yourself in that space where you're building client sites or you're doing some sort of client work for somebody. I know I have, and I didn't know that about yourself. Um, let's fast forward a little bit. Come forward to, I don't know, what is it? We're roughly 15 years old now. Is that, what are we at? 15?
17 started in
17.
2003. Yeah.
That's right, 2003. So 17 years forward here, a lot has happened. And if we bring things a little bit more into the APAC region, what trends are you seeing just over the last few years? We all know the massive growth of people getting online in the APAC region. What are you seeing? What excites you from the growth of the region?
Yeah. Well, I think, and this happened in the US before, and I'm now seeing it other places, is that social media, the Facebooks, Twitters,
Mm,
etc. of the world, and particularly Facebook as being probably the most popular, um, acclimate people to publishing online. So it gets them comfortable.
Yeah.
But I think of that as almost like training wheels, right? It teaches you that it's safe to do so and some of the benefits.
Yeah.
But if you end up enjoying it, you eventually want to have a space that really is more yours, not where you're just kind of mixed in with everyone else, the same design, same content, the algorithm maybe showing your stuff, maybe not.
Yeah.
And same thing with businesses. Facebook has done a great job bringing probably hundreds of millions of businesses online, but they probably see that their needs and their interests are not necessarily aligned with Facebook's or these other social networks that might be good at onboarding people, but not necessarily great at helping them create their own space online.
Yeah.
I believe just like I want every human to have food, water, education,
Sure.
safety,
Yeah.
shelter, everything. I want everyone to have the ability to have a beautiful web presence
Hmm.
because I think a presence online in this sort of metaverse that we're all creating together is, if it's not already for some people, it will be as important as all those other things I just said.
Hmm.
And the access to the internet and the ability to publish on the internet is becoming, if it not already is, a key human right.
Yeah.
Um, with WordPress, we try to make software which is open source, which is free, which is highly accessible, which is translated into every language possible, to encourage people and allow people to do that and do so in a way where they have true ownership over what they're creating. It's like owning land or owning a home
Hmm.
versus renting an apartment or being a sharecropper.
I've always thought that was an interesting point. You actually had introduced me to that point of,
Hmm.
as I was getting online, I probably, before I had a website, I'm pretty sure I had a Facebook account, or probably was MySpace at the time. But yeah, some sort of social network. And I actually it had not occurred to me, and I just think you're naive naturally by getting online, that you don't own the thing that you're on.
Hmm.
And that concept, I think, is very important, the message that you share with that. But I also don't think a lot of people naturally come to that conclusion that, hey, is this content I'm putting online, is it mine? Do I own it? I think they just automatically think that. Um, and I think that leads me into my next point of where I was talking with some colleagues, and I think this is the challenge of WordPress. When I think of WordPress in my personal experience, I think of, there's a whole segment of web pros building sites that they know how to tinker with WordPress, they know how to use it, they're familiar with it all. And then there's a whole segment of people that are getting online that want to pay somebody to do that
Mm-hmm.
for them. They're a novice, they don't know how to do it, nor do they care to learn how to do it. And so there's been all the growth of WordPress where you got the plugin market, you got the theme market. There's this whole ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I think about, to your point of what you said earlier, APAC region, you see a lot of people just starting with a Facebook page, or you see a lot of people. We know the trends with mobile first, and oftentimes mobile only.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at WordPress, specifically the open source project, I see the natural challenge from a product perspective of how can we look, I guess if you look at Facebook or Wix, they could easily make a product specific to each region that plays to the market in that space. How can an open source project like WordPress also appeal maybe to a region that views getting online differently than maybe we do in North America where we're based? I see that as a natural challenge, and I'm curious about your vision for how do we approach that?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, there's no one else that builds WordPress, right? It's the people that show up. So
Yeah.
if you have an idea for how it could work better in your region, and maybe that's a country, maybe it's a region, maybe it's a city, maybe it's the block you live on.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
You can contribute and get involved with WordPress, or you can be part of the localization groups that their job is localizing WordPress
Hmm.
to be accessible to as wide an audience as possible. So, and that can include, promoting different plugins or other things that might be tailored for a particular market. I would also encourage folks, even if you're building a WordPress site for someone who says, "Oh, I never want to see it, I never want to look at it, I never want to touch it," to look for the opportunity to pass on that torch of knowledge and wisdom of uh, being able to use these tools.
Hmm.
Um, you know, WordPress might not be intuitive for every person in the world, but I do believe that's something that with someone showing you, it's something you can learn some of the basics of in 5 or 10 minutes. And with a little bit more time and practice, anyone can get quite good at. That's exciting because as you learn to use these tools, it's almost like learning to play an instrument. You don't need a ton of chords on a
Sure.
guitar to be able to play a lot of different songs. And so if you can pass on that torch of knowledge to someone, it's one of the greatest gifts you can give them, whether they know they need it or not. Much like almost each of us had that torch passed to us at some point.
Yeah.
I do believe that I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for the incredible generosity of so many folks, both in person and on the internet, strangers I never met, sharing their wealth of knowledge. And knowledge is one of those beautiful things that the more you share it, the more you have, and the more
Yeah,
you get back.
for sure. Totally. Well, let me push on that. So when we think about, the next 100 million people getting online, and
Mhm.
I guess back to my previous point a little bit, like we do see people getting online in different ways,
Mhm.
different mediums, different tools. Um, how can people, I guess, like literally, I think, myself included, I know when I was introduced to WordPress, people say contribute. And I was like, I don't really know what that means. Like,
Mhm.
how do I literally do that? Like, and at the time I had no development background. So it's like, okay, like, I'll wait till WordPress works for me because I don't know how to contribute. Like, how can people in the APAC region help WordPress compete and be more competitive for their world, for what they do?
Hmm. Well, the one thing that is accessible to literally anyone is if you know how to use WordPress, teach someone else. I mean,
Hmm.
that it sounds simple, but it's so powerful. And so much of, I think, WordPress's success has been one person at a time, telling one other
Yeah.
person. In terms of how to contribute, a few things. If you see things around WordPress.org, the software, anything that you feel could be better and you know how to, come on in. If there's an area of craft, whether that's design, translation, documentation, education, development, like you mentioned. I mean, we focus a lot on engineering, but it's really
Hmm.
so much more than that
Yeah.
that you want to contribute at. Contributing, getting involved with the community at WordPress is a great way to both give something back, but also up your skills because you'll be able to work with folks from around the world um, with all sorts of different experiences and some incredibly advanced in every particular area I just mentioned. So I think it's different for everyone. I've always been drawn a lot to the development side. I,
Hmm.
I don't know why. Like maybe I was trying to be like my dad. Um, but also to the customer service side. So, I got my start on forums, just helping people and answering questions. And it's
Yeah.
a big part of how I learn is helping others. And in fact, we kind of enshrined this in my company today. My company, Automattic, is 1,300 people.
Yeah.
Every single person who starts does 2 weeks of support to start and then rotates back at least 1 week per year in doing customer support. So I'm actually doing some of it this December. So if
Nice.
you do live chat with WordPress.com, there's a chance you might be chatting with me.
That's awesome.
And hopefully
Love
I
that.
can help you, but I'm also going to be learning a lot
Uh-huh.
from every interaction on what people's challenges are, what their hopes and needs are, and that's going to spark my imagination for how we can evolve the software.
I honestly admire you for doing that. I've talked to many company leaders about that principle of just everybody doing support. I think it's brilliant. I love that. Uh, Before we go into Q&A, I just wanted to ask you, WordPress in the next 2 years, what excites you the most? What's coming down the line that you see that you think, maybe we're not aware of, or what excites you the most?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'll start with the community side. We just
Yeah.
had, I think, definitely unique for WordPress and maybe unique for all open source,
Hmm.
and all women led release squad.
I saw
WordPress
that. Very cool.
5.6, Nina
Yeah.
Simone had over 35 women or non-binary people who led that release, and it's an amazing one, and that's so cool because sometimes I feel like the mechanisms of open source could sometimes be discouraging
Hmm.
to folks for contributing, and so we always want WordPress to be accessible and inclusive of everyone, and it's great to see some results of that. In the software itself, I mean, it's really all about Gutenberg. So you've
Yeah.
probably heard about me talk about Gutenberg for a while. If you're in WordPress 5.0 or above, like I think 80% of WordPress sites are, you've probably seen it or used it.
Yep. Yep.
But a lot of people don't know. I talked about Gutenberg in 4 phases. The first phase was the editor, so editing posts and pages. The second was allowing Gutenberg to edit the whole site. Phase 3 was kind of like editorial workflows. So like Google Docs allows multiple people to edit at the same time and everything updates and edits in real time. Sort of thinking about when the process of crafting a page, a post, a site, and how you can involve other people. So making Gutenberg collaborative. And
Yeah.
then phase 4 is making Gutenberg and then WordPress multilingual, which I know is
Very cool.
incredibly important to the APAC region, but also
Yeah.
important in Canada, important across Europe, important in the
Everywhere.
US as more and
Yeah.
more people speak languages other than English. Um, it's a very tricky problem. A lot of what was built in most CMSs assumed a single language, but you know, many people all around the world, including Facebook, who we were talking about earlier, use
Yeah.
WordPress to power sites in 30
Yeah.
plus languages. And we want to make that really have just a really easy way to do. Phase 1 started a few years ago. We're still in it. We're probably about 40 or 50% of the way through. Phase 2 is going to ship next year.
Yeah.
Phase 3, I'm thinking like a 2022, and phase 4, like a 2023. So that's the next few years
Very
of
cool.
WordPress.
Very cool. No, I love hearing it. That makes me excited. So thanks for sharing that. Let me get into a couple of these questions here. So let's see, from Alexander, news is open the most lucrative markets for WordPress. Are we losing there or going to lose marketing share to Jamstack and headless CMSs?
Um, News is a lucrative. So I believe something like Jamstack or a headless CMS is a means to an end. For some sites, I think it could be a good solution. For many sites, it might be a regression if they don't do it the right way. So it is fun as a developer, and they
Yeah.
have some fantastic developer marketing. It is more complex in a lot of ways. I don't believe it's right for, again, the vast majority of sites. For news in particular, news and media, I would say, is WordPress's strongest, one of our strongest verticals, meaning that it's, I think it's spanning from blogs. Almost every large media site now, particularly the modern ones, are either
Mhm.
built entirely on WordPress or partially on WordPress.
Mm.
I'm excited about the future there. We actually have a partnership with Google for a project named Newspack. And Newspack is a collection of tools aimed primarily at small newspaper and local publishers. But everything that's created there, all the plugins and themes, etc., is also open source. So we've started to see it adopted just organically in the community. And there's some really cool stuff. I think one thing I'm actually going to give you a little preview of State of the Word, which
Yeah.
is coming up next week. I think a week from today, we're going
Nice.
to broadcast it. There's arranging the homepage and editing the homepage was typically something that was more hard coded into a theme or you need
Yeah.
developers to do, or kind of I've seen clunky things with widgets. I saw this demo actually of the Newspack team of just the most beautiful Gutenberg-based homepage editor. So you could have kind of a query block that would say like, here, put here the last 5 posts from this category, put here a breaking story, put here. You could really design the whole thing.
Yeah.
And almost every editor that sees this is just totally enamored with it. And just seeing it myself as someone who's not running a news site, I
Yeah.
was excited to see the power of Gutenberg applied because it really sort of shows what when you move to the atomic unit of content being a block, just how much creativity that unlocks.
That's awesome. Very cool. Looks like the next question. I'm very curious on this myself. Do you ever see WordPress removing support for PHP and going away from it?
No, PHP is so good. I mean, there's a
I didn't
reason
think you
that,
were going to say that, but I just thought I would ask.
and especially for the backend. So for serving the API, for serving
Hmm.
that sort of stuff, there's a reason why Wikipedia uses, the reason why Facebook has been doubling down on PHP. It's incredibly robust. And with the recent versions of PHP, particularly 7 and above, the speed improvements are incredible.
Yeah.
It's competitive with really everything else out there. And for us, we've been able to, we run across Automattic services, which include things like Gravatar, WordPress.com. I mean, we're serving at this point hundreds of billions of PHP requests per day,
Yeah.
and it just works beautifully. So now the front end of what you access with WordPress via the APIs can and will evolve. Like we have our native apps, the WordPress apps in the app stores that access the APIs. We have Gutenberg, which is built on top of our APIs as a first-party thing. We have, headless or decoupled sites that are using the API. So there's a lot that could be built on there. And in fact, WordPress 5.6 includes a really novel and nice password mechanism for authentication for third-party applications. That's a bit more secure. So there's a lot happening there. But there is something beautiful about, if you imagine Jamstack where you're really piecing together lots of different tools and vendors and everything to serve a website, there's also something really beautiful about when you can have a single vendor, a single stack, and have the entirety of the request, all the performance be done server-side rendering, and serve something really fast and simple to the client. That can be a really, really great user experience, particularly for content-driven sites.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Is WordPress.org, and called out specifically, looking at innovating for India or the APAC region differently at all? Is that on the roadmap to differentiate that way?
I mean, this is something where I love the input from the audience here. So if there's, my Twitter handle's Photomat, PHOTOMATT, same on Instagram and Tumblr. So if you have any ideas there, please just tag me. I'd love to read them.
Okay.
India is, and it's interesting because India is obviously more than just a country. It's a collection of an incredible set of regions and languages and people from so many different histories. And I certainly have been astounded by the diversity every time I've been there. And so I imagine that it's more than just thinking of India as a monolithic thing, but really tailoring it down a bit more. And probably the folks listening will be able to help there more than anything I could ever imagine.
Well, let me ask you along those lines, because this is my own personal question. I've always found the WordPress app actually very helpful and very enjoyable to use. I think it's one of the quiet features of WordPress, and I know it's, I actually don't fully understand the relationship of it, but maybe talk about what is the role of the WordPress app to the larger community? Because we're talking about WordPress first and all these things, and I think many people aren't even aware of it.
Yeah. Well, please check out the mobile app.
Yes.
Mobile is one of those areas where, we had to be pragmatic over being necessarily 100% pure. So our mobile apps are 100% open source. They are, I think, part of the WordPress.org repositories. They're developed more primarily in terms of developers employed by Automattic. They do have some other contributors, but where WordPress core is 95 or 96% outside non-Automattic contributors, the mobile apps are probably 95% Automattic contributors. So it really is Automattic driven. And you can run it completely independently. So it can just talk to XML RPC on your self-hosted website. But one of the things we found was a lot of the features that are compelling to folks on mobile, including like a reader feed, stats, notifications, etc., do lend themselves to being easier with centralized services. So if you're hosted on WordPress.com, or even better, if you host yourself and run the Jetpack plugin, we're able to leverage those APIs to provide this much more native experience, native experience.
Yeah.
And we've seen that for folks that use it, they really love the ability to update their sites on the go, see the latest comments, moderate things, see their stats. It's really fun. And like you said, they're very smooth to use. I believe they have over 4 stars or 4.5 stars rating in the app stores. So now getting them more usage, I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Usually we just make a good product and people show up, but the apps have been relatively flat at just like 1 million or so monthly active users. So I would love to spread the word a little more, because I think when people use that in addition to the web, it allows them to engage with their site in a more active way.
Gotcha. I guess as one final question, to all the web pros listening, Gutenberg very much is, at least in my opinion, bringing in the novice base a lot more, making WordPress a lot more user friendly, which we both know has at some degree, maybe scared some of the web pro audience that, hey, we might be out of what we do and what we're good at. Where do you see the web pros of WordPress that love to build client sites with WordPress, that love to configure it, do what they do with it? Where do you see them finding their place in WordPress going forward? Is there a specific place or feature set or anything along those lines that help reassure that there is this place for web pros still?
Yeah, I think of it not necessarily as, I mean, sure, we always want to make every version of WordPress easier to use because our goal is to democratize publishing. But I feel like pre-Gutenberg, we had like maybe 16 or 256 colors we could paint with on the
Yeah.
canvas. And the blocks enable, millions or billions of colors, in that
Hmm.
now you could create a custom block for a client, or you can configure Gutenberg to show certain blocks in certain places and people can't move it, but they could add their own image or do other things. Gutenberg's way more mobile friendly, to tie back to a theme we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Um, it's way harder to break. So I don't know if you've ever like built a site for a client, and in the old tiny MC WYSIWYG editor, they somehow managed getting the divs wrong and the whole site broke and everything like that. With Gutenberg, it's incredibly robust, and we find that it's a new concept. I mean, the tough thing with Gutenberg is we are introducing a form of interaction which is novel and new to the world. It is true that people were more used to kind of that Word document model of editing things.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so much better that as soon as people grasp it, it's hard for them to ever to return. And in fact, we hear people asking like they want to use Gutenberg blocks inside of Google Docs, because they love being able to create a gallery really easily, or embed YouTube videos, or all these sorts of things that Gutenberg can make very easy, and then also move them around, embed them, put them in 2 columns. Um, so what I hope is that for all the web pros, it unlocks some creativity, and it also makes your job, when you pass that torch of knowledge to someone new, you're able to pass them something that gives them a lot more capabilities to create really interesting, compelling blog posts, or edit their own web pages, or update things in a way that they might have found challenging before, or you might have been hesitant to give them the ability to update because of the chance for them to break it. With
Sure.
Gutenberg, uh, there's been a huge amount of work both in allowing people to create blocks, but also allowing you to customize what blocks are available, customize how the blocks are displayed. You can really create a very rich application by pre-configuring Gutenberg. So
Very cool.
um, please check it out. There's some great tutorials online. We have join our WordPress.org Slack. There's a really rich community there. You can ask questions or show off what you're doing. As I said, feel free to tweet or send me things if you're doing something fun. I live and breathe WordPress, so I'm looking at this stuff all day. Um, and it is the future. So, I mean, what's
Cool.
beautiful about Gutenberg is that it provides a new standard, much like the post loop or themes were in the past.
Yep.
Knowing Gutenberg is the skill you'll need to be an expert at to be a WordPress professional in the coming years. So
That's a
the
great
sooner
point.
you can get proficient at it, the better.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I know in my experience, I've learned, some blocks are easier and some are more challenging, or creating different ones. And um, I think that's great advice, especially like looking to customize them and make custom blocks. That goes really far especially for each and every client. So anyway, Matt, I wanted to obviously thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I can't wait till we can all be in person again. And this was great. And thanks again.
Thanks so much. And my regards to everyone listening. Thank you for tuning in, and best of luck. Keep hacking, keep coding, and remember open source.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Matt.